21 Savage was facing deportation that would have ended his career. NBA Youngboy was staring at decades in federal prison. Young Thug got hit with a RICO case that had prosecutors calling him the head of a criminal enterprise. Gunna was locked up on gang charges that seemed impossible to beat. And right now, as we speak, Lil Durk is fighting a murder-for-hire case that could put him away for life. What do all these cases have in common? One man, one lawyer who somehow keeps pulling off legal miracles that have prosecutors shaking their heads and rappers walking out of courtrooms free. His name is Drew Findling, and he calls himself the billion-dollar lawyer. Not because that's how much he charges, though we'll get into his fees later, and trust me, they're wild, but because that's the combined value of the clients he's represented. From Migos to Gucci Mane, from Waka Flocka to some of the biggest names currently dominating hip-hop, Drew Findling has become the one lawyer that rappers call when their freedom is on the line. But here's what makes his story fascinating. Drew Findling isn't from the streets. He didn't grow up in the hood. He's a white lawyer from Atlanta who somehow became the most trusted legal mind in hip-hop. And the way he beats these cases, it's not just about knowing the law. It's about understanding the culture, manipulating the media, and exploiting every weakness in the prosecution's case with surgical precision. Tonight, we're breaking down every major case Drew Findling has handled. How he got 21 Savage out of ICE custody when everyone thought he was getting deported. How he helped NBA Youngboy avoid life in prison. How he navigated the Young Thug RICO case that had the entire hip-hop world watching. How he got Gunna out when it seemed impossible. And how he's currently working to keep Lil Durk from spending the rest of his life in federal prison. We're talking about his tactics, his strategies, his courtroom performance, and why he's become the most important lawyer in hip-hop history. So grab your blankets and pillows, because this is the complete story of how Drew Findling keeps getting these rappers out of prison when nobody else can. It's your boy Rap Sleep, and we're diving deep into the legal mind that saved more rap careers than any record label ever could. Before we get into the cases that made him legendary, you need to understand who Drew Findling actually is, because his background is nothing like what you'd expect for someone who's become hip-hop's most trusted lawyer. Drew Findling was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Not the Atlanta of trap music and street culture that would later define the city, but an earlier Atlanta, growing up in relatively comfortable circumstances that gave him access to education and opportunities. He went to the University of Florida for his undergraduate degree, then came back to Georgia for law school at Mercer University, graduating in 1991. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Most lawyers who graduate from solid law schools try to get jobs at big corporate firms, handling business deals and civil litigation for wealthy clients. That's where the stable money is, where you build a conventional career. Drew Findling took a completely different path. He started practicing criminal defense almost immediately, working as a public defender and handling cases for people who couldn't afford private attorneys. This is crucial to understanding how he got so good at what he does, because public defenders handle volume. Lots of cases, limited resources, learning to win with what you have rather than what you wish you had. During those early years, Findling was handling everything from DUIs to drug possession to assault cases. He was in courtrooms constantly, learning how prosecutors think, understanding how judges make decisions, figuring out which arguments work and which ones don't. He was building fundamental skills that would later make him invaluable to high-profile clients. But he wasn't just focused on winning cases. He was studying the media, understanding how public perception affects legal outcomes, recognizing that in high-profile cases, the court of public opinion matters almost as much as the actual courtroom. This insight would become one of his most powerful weapons. Findling started making a name for himself in Atlanta's legal community in the late 1990s and early 2000s by taking controversial cases and winning them. Not just winning, but winning in ways that generated media attention and built his reputation. He understood something that most criminal defense lawyers miss. In the modern age, your reputation is your business model. Win big cases, get media coverage, build a brand, and suddenly you're the person that everyone calls when they're in serious trouble. His entry into the hip-hop world started gradually, not with the massive names we know him for now, but with Atlanta rappers who were starting to blow up and getting into legal trouble as their profiles rose. Atlanta was becoming the epicenter of hip-hop in the 2000s, with artists like T.I., Gucci Mane, and Young Jeezy dominating the scene. And with success came legal issues, guns, drugs, assault charges, the kinds of cases that come with the lifestyle many of these artists were living. Findling started handling some of these cases, and word spread in the Atlanta hip-hop community. Here was a lawyer who understood the culture, who didn't judge his clients for their lyrics or their lifestyle, who actually listened to their music and understood the context of their art. He wasn't some corporate lawyer who looked down on rap as noise or dismissed the culture as illegitimate. He genuinely appreciated hip-hop and understood its significance. This cultural competence became one of his biggest advantages. When prosecutors tried to use rap lyrics as evidence of criminal activity, Findling could counter with sophisticated arguments about artistic expression, metaphor, and the storytelling tradition in hip-hop. When media portrayed his clients as thugs, Findling could provide counter-narratives about artists from difficult circumstances trying to escape poverty through their talent. By the 2000s, Findling had established himself as Atlanta's go-to lawyer for rappers in trouble. He'd handled cases for Gucci Mane, Waka Flocka Flocka, and numerous other artists who were dealing with serious criminal charges. His success rate was impressive, but more importantly, his approach was unique. Let me break down Findling's core strategy, because understanding this is crucial to understanding how he wins cases that other lawyers can't. First, he fights in the court of public opinion before the actual trial even starts. He gives interviews, releases statements, frames the narrative in ways that make his clients sympathetic. By the time a case gets to trial, potential jurors have already been exposed to his version of events through media coverage he helped shape. Second, he attacks the prosecution's case at every possible point. Not just the major evidence, but every small detail, every procedural step, every witness statement. He looks for inconsistencies, violations of his client's rights, problems with how evidence was collected. He makes the prosecution work for every single piece of evidence they want to introduce. Third, he humanizes his clients in ways that go beyond typical criminal defense. He doesn't just argue legal technicalities. He tells stories about who his clients are, where they came from, what they've overcome, what they've contributed to their communities. He makes judges and juries see his clients as human beings rather than criminals. Fourth, he leverages his reputation and relationships. After decades in Atlanta's legal system, Findling knows the judges, the prosecutors, the court staff. He understands how they think, what arguments they respond to, how to negotiate when negotiation is possible. These relationships matter in ways that newer lawyers can't replicate. Fifth, he's willing to take cases to trial when necessary, but he's also strategic about plea deals. He doesn't have ego about winning every case through trial if a good plea deal serves his client's interests better. But his willingness to actually go to trial gives him leverage in negotiations that lawyers who always plead out don't have. Now let's talk about money, because understanding how Findling charges is part of understanding his business model. He's not cheap. For a case like 21 Savage's immigration situation or Young Thug's RICO case, we're talking about legal fees that easily run into 6 figures, sometimes 7 figures for the most complex cases. But here's why rappers pay it. Findling wins. And when you're facing years or decades in prison, when your entire career and life are on the line, 6 figures or even 7 figures is a bargain compared to losing your freedom. These artists are making millions from their music careers. Spending a fraction of that on the lawyer who can keep them out of prison is just good business. Findling calls himself the billion-dollar lawyer because if you add up the net worth and earnings of all the clients he's represented, it totals into the billions. Migos alone, before Takeoff's death, were reportedly worth hundreds of millions. Young Thug's music catalog and business ventures are worth tens of millions. 21 Savage's career generates millions annually. When you represent that level of client, the billion-dollar label starts making sense. But the money isn't just about ego or branding, it's about resources. Complex federal cases like what Lil Durk is facing require teams of lawyers, investigators, expert witnesses, forensic analysts. A single RICO case can generate thousands of pages of discovery that need to be analyzed. The fees Findling charges fund the infrastructure necessary to compete with federal prosecutors, who have nearly unlimited government resources. His firm isn't just him, it's a team of attorneys, paralegals, and investigators who work on these cases. When you hire Drew Findling, you're hiring an entire operation designed to fight the government at the highest level. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Findling isn't just reactive, waiting for clients to get arrested and then defending them. He's become a counselor to artists, advising them on how to avoid legal problems in the first place. He'll review contracts, advise on business decisions, warn about legal risks in their activities. He's become part of their team, trying to keep them out of trouble before arrests happen. But when arrests do happen, and in hip-hop they inevitably do, Findling is the first call. And over the past decade, he's handled some of the most high-profile hip-hop cases in history. Cases that seemed unwinnable. Cases where the evidence looked overwhelming. Cases where prosecutors thought they had slam-dunk convictions. And somehow he keeps finding ways to win or at least minimize the damage. So let's break down exactly how he's done it case by case, starting with one of his most impressive victories. February 3rd, 2019, Super Bowl Sunday. While America was preparing to watch the Patriots take on the Rams, ICE agents arrested 21 Savage in Atlanta, revealing something that shocked the entire hip-hop world. The rapper everyone thought was from Atlanta was actually a British citizen who'd been living in the United States illegally since he was a child. This wasn't just a legal problem, this was a career-ending crisis. 21 Savage's entire image, his whole brand, was built on being from Atlanta's Zone 6. His music talked about Atlanta street life, about growing up in the city, about experiences that formed his identity, and suddenly ICE was saying he was actually from the UK, had overstayed a visa that expired when he was a teenager, and needed to be deported immediately. The media went crazy. Memes flooded social media mocking 21 Savage's British origin. People were making jokes about tea and crumpets. His credibility was being destroyed in real time, and legally the situation looked terrible. Immigration cases are notoriously difficult to win, especially when the person has been living in the country illegally for years. This is where Drew Findling entered the picture, and this is where we see his genius on full display. First, Findling immediately framed the narrative. Within hours of the arrest, he was giving interviews explaining that 21 Savage came to the United States legally as a child with his family, that his visa expired through no fault of his own when he was just a kid, that he'd been trying to adjust his status through proper legal channels, and that ICE's decision to arrest him on Super Bowl Sunday was politically motivated and unnecessarily harsh. Notice what he did there. He made 21 Savage sympathetic. A child brought to America by his family, who grew up here, who became successful here, who was trying to fix his immigration status through legal means. He reframed the story from illegal immigrant rapper to American success story being torn down by overzealous immigration enforcement. Second, Findling attacked the timing and circumstances of the arrest. Why Super Bowl Sunday? Why the high-profile nature of the arrest? Why the immediate media notification? He suggested that ICE was using 21 Savage's fame for publicity, turning a routine immigration matter into a spectacle for political purposes. Third, and this is crucial, Findling got 21 Savage released from ICE custody on bond while the case was being resolved. This is harder than it sounds. Immigration detention is different from criminal detention, and getting bond in immigration cases isn't guaranteed. But Findling argued successfully that 21 Savage wasn't a flight risk, that he had deep ties to the community, that he was cooperating fully, and that detention was unnecessary. Getting him out of detention was essential for multiple reasons. It allowed 21 Savage to continue his music career, generating income to pay legal fees and support his family. It let him maintain his public profile instead of disappearing behind bars. And psychologically, it showed that Findling could deliver immediate results, building trust between lawyer and client. Fourth, Findling began the process of adjusting 21 Savage's immigration status. This was complex because 21 had been in the country illegally for years, which normally creates serious obstacles to legalization. But there were potential pathways. U visas for victims of crimes. 21 Savage's brother had been murdered. Adjustment of status based on how long he'd been in the country. Humanitarian considerations given his children who are U.S. citizens. Now, here's where Findling's public relations strategy became crucial. While the legal process moved forward, he helped 21 Savage reshape his public image. Instead of hiding from the British origin revelation, they leaned into it while emphasizing his American identity. 21 gave interviews talking about his experience coming to America as a child, growing up in Atlanta, making it in the music industry. He talked about wanting to stay in the country where his children were born, where his career was, where his life was. The narrative shifted from mockery to sympathy. People started seeing 21 Savage as a dreamer, one of those kids brought to America young who consider themselves American despite their legal status. Major figures in music and entertainment spoke up supporting him. Other artists who were immigrants or had immigration issues showed solidarity. Findling had successfully changed the story from rapper deported for lying about his identity to successful artist fighting to stay in the country he calls home. Meanwhile, the legal work continued behind the scenes. Findling's team was filing motions, gathering documentation, preparing arguments for why 21 Savage should be allowed to stay. They were pulling together every piece of evidence that showed his ties to the United States, his contributions to the community, his lack of criminal history. Despite what some of his lyrics suggested, 21 Savage didn't actually have serious criminal convictions that would make deportation more likely. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Immigration law is complex and often depends on prosecutorial discretion. ICE doesn't have to deport everyone who's deportable. They have choices about who to prioritize. Findling's strategy was to make 21 Savage the kind of case where deportation looked unnecessary and even harmful. He emphasized 21's charitable work, his financial contributions to the Atlanta community, his role as a father to U.S. citizen children who would be harmed by his deportation, his clean record in recent years despite his rough past. He built a case that deporting 21 Savage wasn't in anyone's interest except prosecutors looking for a high-profile win. Throughout 2019 and into 2020, the case continued. 21 Savage remained free on bond, continuing his career, releasing music, maintaining his profile. Every month he stayed in the country was a small victory, keeping him relevant and successful while the legal battle played out. And then, over time, the pressure to deport him seemed to ease. The initial media frenzy died down. 21 Savage's legal status became more normalized, with him living in the U.S. under some form of legal authorization while his full status was being resolved. The threat of immediate deportation faded. By 2023, reports indicated that 21 Savage's immigration status had been successfully adjusted to allow him to remain in the United States legally. The exact details weren't made public. Immigration cases often end with confidential settlements, but the result was clear. 21 Savage wasn't being deported. He could continue living in Atlanta, making music, raising his children. How did he pull this off when the case initially looked so bad? Let's break down the specific tactics. Media management. Findling controlled the narrative from day one, turning 21 from a target of mockery into a sympathetic figure fighting to stay in his adopted home. Immediate action. Getting 21 released from ICE custody right away showed results and prevented the case from dragging out with him detained. Technical legal work. Behind the public relations campaign, Findling's team was doing sophisticated immigration law work, finding pathways to legal status that weren't obvious initially. Humanization. By emphasizing 21's children, his community ties, his charitable work, Findling made him someone judges and prosecutors could relate to rather than just another deportation case. Patience. Rather than trying to force a quick resolution that might go badly, Findling let the case play out over years, knowing that as long as 21 stayed in the country and out of trouble, momentum would shift in their favor. The 21 Savage case established Findling as someone who could handle immigration cases on top of his criminal defense expertise. It showed he could win in multiple legal arenas, not just state criminal court, and it proved he understood the importance of public perception in determining legal outcomes. But as impressive as the 21 Savage case was, it was just one example of Findling's skills. His work on violent crime cases, federal drug cases, and especially RICO prosecutions would prove even more complex and challenging. NBA YoungBoy, real name Kentrell Gaulden, has been in legal trouble more times than almost any other major rapper. Multiple arrests, multiple cases, multiple jurisdictions, all trying to put him in prison. And through much of this legal chaos, Drew Findling has been in his corner, fighting charges that could have ended his career before it really took off. Let me paint you a picture of just how much legal trouble YoungBoy has faced. Gun charges in Louisiana, gun charges in California, federal weapons charges, probation violations, allegations connected to violence and gang activity. This isn't someone with one case that needs defending. This is someone whose legal issues could fill an entire filing cabinet. The most serious case Findling helped YoungBoy with involved federal firearms charges that came with the potential for years in federal prison. This is crucial to understand. Federal cases are different from state cases. Federal prosecutors have more resources, higher conviction rates, and sentences are typically much harsher. When the feds charge you, they usually have you dead to rights with evidence they've been collecting for months or years. In YoungBoy's case, the federal charges stemmed from an incident in 2020 where he was arrested in Baton Rouge after a video shoot. Police found firearms, and given YoungBoy's previous felony conviction, possessing firearms was a federal crime that could carry 10 years in prison. Now here's where it gets interesting. Youngboy was initially held without bond, which is common in federal cases where defendants are considered flight risks or dangers to the community. For a rapper as young and successful as Youngboy, being detained pending trial could have destroyed his career momentum. Can't record music or maintain your fan base when you're locked up for months or years waiting for trial. Findling went to work immediately on getting Youngboy released on bond. This is harder in federal court than state court because federal judges are much more cautious about releasing defendants, especially in weapons cases. But Findling crafted arguments that Youngboy wasn't a flight risk, that he'd comply with strict conditions, that detention was unnecessary and would harm him disproportionately. After extended legal arguments and appeals, Youngboy was eventually released on house arrest with electronic monitoring. This was a massive win because it allowed him to continue making music from home, maintaining his career while the case was pending. House arrest with an ankle monitor isn't freedom, but it's infinitely better than sitting in federal detention for years waiting for trial. Now, while Youngboy was on house arrest, Findling was preparing the defense strategy for the actual charges. Federal gun cases seem straightforward. Either you possessed the firearms illegally or you didn't. But Findling understands that every case has potential weak points if you look carefully enough. In Youngboy's case, the defense strategy likely involves several elements. First, challenging whether the firearms were actually Youngboy's. Just because guns were found near him doesn't mean he possessed them legally. Were they in his physical possession? Could they have belonged to someone else present? Did police have legal justification to search? These questions can create reasonable doubt. Second, examining whether police violated Youngboy's Fourth Amendment rights during the arrest and search. If the stop was illegal or the search exceeded what was constitutionally permitted, evidence from it could be suppressed. Without evidence, the prosecution's case falls apart. Third, negotiating with prosecutors about the charges themselves. Federal prosecutors have discretion about which charges to bring and what sentences to recommend. A skilled defense attorney like Findling can negotiate reductions in charges or recommendations for lower sentences in exchange for guilty pleas that save the government the time and expense of trial. Now I need to be clear about something. Youngboy's legal situation is complex and ongoing, with some cases still pending or recently resolved. But what's clear is that Findling's involvement helped navigate situations that could have resulted in Youngboy spending significant time in federal prison during the peak years of his career. The Youngboy cases also demonstrate another Findling specialty: managing multiple jurisdictions. Youngboy had state cases in Louisiana, federal cases in other districts, probation issues that crossed state lines. Coordinating defense across these different legal systems is incredibly complex. Findling had to ensure that how they handled one case didn't create problems in another case. Every plea deal, every motion, every court appearance had to be evaluated for its impact on all the other pending legal issues. This is where having an experienced lawyer with a good reputation across multiple jurisdictions becomes crucial. Findling could call on his network of legal contacts, could bring in local counsel where needed, could coordinate strategy across state and federal systems in ways that less experienced lawyers couldn't manage. One of the most important things Findling did for Youngboy was buying time. In legal defense, time can be your friend. Witnesses' memories fade, evidence gets lost, prosecutors move on to other cases and lose interest. The longer a case drags out, within reason, the more opportunities arise to resolve it favorably or find weaknesses in the prosecution's case. By keeping Youngboy out on house arrest rather than detained, by filing appropriate motions that extended timelines, by negotiating extensions when beneficial, Findling ensured that Youngboy's cases didn't rush to bad conclusions. This patience and strategic timing is something that separates elite lawyers from average ones. Youngboy's career continued throughout these legal battles largely because Findling kept him out of actual custody. He released albums from house arrest, he filmed videos, he maintained his connection with fans. If he'd been locked up in federal detention for years, his career could have stalled completely. Findling's work allowed the business of being NBA Youngboy to continue, even while serious legal issues were being resolved. Now, as of late 2024, Youngboy's federal gun case was reportedly resolved with a plea deal that avoided significant prison time. The exact terms vary in reporting, but what's clear is that despite facing 10 years in federal prison on the charges, Youngboy's actual sentence was far less severe. Some reports indicate he received credit for time served and probation, allowing him to avoid additional prison time beyond what he'd already served during the case. This outcome represents exactly what Findling specializes in, taking cases that look terrible on paper and finding ways to minimize the damage. Could Youngboy have beaten the charges completely at trial? Maybe, but trials are risky. The evidence might have supported conviction, and judges often give harsher sentences after trial convictions than they do for negotiated plea deals. By negotiating a plea that acknowledged some responsibility while avoiding serious prison time, Findling got Youngboy a result that let him move forward with his life and career. That's the practical reality of criminal defense at the highest level. It's not always about complete victory. Sometimes it's about damage control, and Findling is a master of minimizing damage in cases that could have destroyed his clients' lives. The Youngboy cases also showed Findling's ability to handle clients who have ongoing legal issues. Some lawyers want one case, one problem, one solution. But in hip-hop, artists often have multiple legal issues that span years. Findling has shown he's willing to be a long-term legal counselor to these artists, not just a one-time defender. This creates relationships that ensure loyalty and generates ongoing business as new issues inevitably arise. Now we get to what might be Drew Findling's most challenging and highest-profile case. The Young Thug RICO prosecution that shocked the hip-hop world and tested everything Findling has learned in his decades of criminal defense. May 9th, 2022. That's the date that changed everything for Young Thug, Gunna, and numerous other artists associated with YSL, Young Slime Life. A 56-count indictment came down charging 28 people, including some of the biggest names in Atlanta hip-hop, with violations of Georgia's RICO statute, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. For those who don't know, RICO was originally designed to take down mob organizations. The idea is that you don't just charge individuals with specific crimes, you charge the entire organization as a criminal enterprise, then hold everyone in that organization responsible for crimes committed to further the enterprise's goals. It's an incredibly powerful prosecutorial tool because you can charge people for things they didn't personally do if those things benefited the organization they were part of. The indictment alleged that YSL wasn't just a record label. It was a criminal street gang responsible for murders, attempted murders, armed robberies, drug dealing, and more. Young Thug, whose real name is Jeffrey Williams, was charged as a leader of this alleged criminal enterprise. Gunna, real name Sergio Kitchens, was also charged with conspiracy. Now here's what made this case so dangerous. Prosecutors were using rap lyrics as evidence. Songs that Young Thug and Gunna had released, lyrics about violence and crime that artists claimed were artistic expression. Prosecutors were arguing were literal confessions and proof of gang activity. This is where Drew Findling comes in, and this is where we see him fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Findling was hired to represent Young Thug specifically, though his strategy would influence the entire case given Thug's prominence and the interconnected nature of RICO charges. From day one, Findling was attacking the prosecution's case on multiple levels. First, the use of rap lyrics as evidence. Findling argued passionately that this was a violation of Young Thug's First Amendment rights. Rap music is artistic expression, not legal confession. If prosecutors can use lyrics as evidence of crimes, you're essentially punishing artists for their art. Findling pointed out that we don't prosecute Johnny Cash's family for his song about shooting a man in Reno, and we shouldn't treat rap differently just because prosecutors don't understand or respect hip-hop culture. This argument resonated beyond just Young Thug's case. Artists across the industry, legal scholars, civil rights organizations all rallied around the idea that using lyrics as evidence sets a dangerous precedent that could chill artistic expression. Findling was fighting not just for Young Thug, but for the principle that art shouldn't be criminalized. Second, Findling challenged the fundamental premise of the RICO charges. Just because YSL is the name of both a record label and allegedly a gang doesn't make everyone associated with it a gang member. Young Thug is a successful musician who signed artists to his label. The fact that some people in his broader circle might have committed crimes doesn't make him responsible for those crimes or mean he was running a criminal enterprise. Findling's argument was that prosecutors were blurring the line between artistic image and criminal reality. In hip-hop, artists create personas, tell stories, adopt aesthetics that include references to street life and gang culture. That doesn't make them actual gang leaders any more than acting in a mafia movie makes you a mobster. Third, Findling fought to get Young Thug released on bond. In RICO cases, defendants are often denied bond because of the seriousness of the charges and the alleged danger they pose. But Young Thug wasn't some street criminal. He was an internationally successful artist with legitimate income, family ties, community connections, and every reason to show up for trial rather than fleeing. The bond fight was intense and ongoing, with Findling making multiple attempts to secure Young Thug's release. He argued that pre-trial detention was unnecessary, that Thug could be monitored electronically, that the conditions for denying bond weren't met. He emphasized Thug's lack of personal violence convictions, his status as a father, his contributions to Atlanta's music scene and economy. Despite Findling's best efforts, Young Thug remained detained, held without bond as the case progressed toward trial. This was a setback, but it didn't stop Findling from preparing an aggressive defense. Now let's talk about Gunna's case specifically. Because while Findling was representing Young Thug, Gunna had his own legal team dealing with his charges. But the two cases were interconnected through the RICO indictment. And what happened with Gunna's case had implications for everyone else charged. Gunna was facing years in prison on RICO conspiracy charges. His legal team negotiated a plea deal where Gunna entered what's called an Alford plea, acknowledging that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict him while not actually admitting guilt personally. In exchange for this plea, Gunna was sentenced to 5 years with 1 year served. He got credit for time already spent in jail, and the remainder suspended to probation, meaning he'd be released immediately. This plea deal was controversial in the hip-hop community. Some saw it as Gunna snitching or cooperating with prosecutors against Young Thug and others. However, the legal reality was more nuanced. Gunna's plea didn't require testimony against anyone else. He made a statement as part of his plea that affirmed YSL was a gang, but he didn't provide specific evidence or testimony about specific crimes by specific people. Still, the optics were terrible. Gunna got out while Young Thug and others remained locked up. Fans and industry figures accused Gunna of abandoning his co-defendants to save himself. His reputation took a serious hit, with other artists distancing themselves and his career suffering despite his release from custody. For Findling and Young Thug's defense, Gunna's plea was both a problem and potentially an opportunity. The problem was that a co-defendant admitting the core allegation of the case, that YSL was a gang, made defending the remaining defendants harder. The opportunity was that Gunna's plea didn't actually require cooperation, showing that prosecutors might be willing to resolve cases without defendants testifying against each other. The Young Thug RICO trial began in late 2023 and quickly became one of the longest and most complex criminal trials in Georgia history. The jury selection alone took months because finding jurors who didn't have opinions about a case involving one of the most famous rappers in the world was nearly impossible. Findling's courtroom strategy during the trial showcased all his skills. He was aggressive in cross-examining prosecution witnesses, finding inconsistencies in their testimony, questioning their credibility, suggesting alternative explanations for evidence. He made passionate speeches to the jury about artistic freedom and the criminalization of hip-hop culture. He fought to exclude prejudicial evidence and rap lyrics that he argued were more inflammatory than probative. The trial was chaotic. Multiple defendants, multiple lawyers, thousands of pieces of evidence, testimony from dozens of witnesses. It dragged on month after month, becoming a war of attrition where whoever could outlast the other side might ultimately prevail. But throughout it all, Findling maintained his focus on Young Thug's defense. He wasn't trying to defend everyone charged in the case. He was laser-focused on proving that Jeffrey Williams was an artist, not a gang leader. That his success came from music, not crime. That prosecutors were confusing artistic persona with criminal reality. As of late 2024, the Young Thug RICO trial resulted in a negotiated resolution. After months of trial, Young Thug entered a non-negotiated plea to the charges, meaning he was pleading guilty but leaving his sentence up to the judge rather than accepting a specific deal with prosecutors. The judge sentenced Young Thug to time served plus probation, allowing him to be released from custody after spending over 2 years detained during the case. He faced strict probation conditions, including staying away from Atlanta for a period of time, not associating with gang members and other restrictions, but he was free. This outcome represents exactly what Findling does best, fighting cases that look terrible on paper and finding ways to keep his clients out of prison or minimize their time inside. Young Thug faced potential decades in prison on the RICO charges. Through aggressive defense, fighting every step of the case, and ultimately negotiating a resolution after showing prosecutors they had a real fight on their hands, Findling got Young Thug out after roughly 2 years detained. Could they have won at trial? We'll never know, because the case was resolved before a verdict. But here's the reality of federal and RICO cases. The conviction rate is extremely high. Prosecutors don't bring these cases unless they're confident in their evidence. Taking a case all the way to verdict and losing means the defendant potentially faces decades rather than years in prison when the judge sentences them. By negotiating a resolution that got Young Thug released after time served, Findling got him the opportunity to restart his life and career without spending the next decade or more in prison. That's practical, effective criminal defense. The Young Thug and Gunna cases demonstrated several things about how Findling operates. He's willing to fight long, complex cases that require years of work and preparation. The RICO trial wasn't something that resolved in a few months. It demanded sustained effort over years, and Findling was in it for the duration. He understands media strategy, even in cases where he can't fully control the narrative. The Young Thug case generated massive media attention, much of it negative. Findling did what he could to frame Young Thug as an artist being persecuted for his music. Even when the evidence and circumstances made that argument difficult, he knows when to fight and when to negotiate. After months of trial showed both sides what they were up against, Findling negotiated a resolution that,